Hello and welcome to our panel on inclusion and impactful stories that matter. It is presented by CBS Studios, and Paramount Plus. And joining us to talk about these issues are three very accomplished and creative members of Hollywood's Latinx community. First, I'd like to introduce Alana Peña, who is a writer and producer, who is the creator and executive producer of Diary of a Future President, that is, on Disney Plus, and Wilson Cruz, who is an award-winning actor, executive producer, and activist in the LGBTQ community. Wilson currently stars as Dr. Hugh Culber in the Paramount Plus series Star Trek Discovery. And Wilmer Valderrama, who is an actor. He's a producer and activist who is currently playing Special Agent Nick Torres on NCIS. He is also recognized for his role in that 70s show, and he owns a production company, and he's involved in so many causes. Well, thank you all for joining us today. You know, I've read your bios and I look at all of you and you are so successful. It's so hard to believe sometimes that Latinos, in fact, do face some issues of exclusion, perhaps in the entertainment industry. But we do know that progress is probably on the way and that there have been some changes over the years. So let's start with changes that you have seen as far as opportunities for Latinos in Hollywood. Wilmer, you've been around for a while. Tell us what you've seen, the evolution.
Well, you know, I think it all kind of, to talk about the evolution, I think it's important to talk about the trajectory of a lot of the Latino community as a community before it was even represented on screen. We were making waves in music, we were making waves in other forms of narrative, but somehow the screens, whether it was the silver screen or the TV screen, were, I guess I would say they were curated by minds and individuals and filtering systems that actually assumed they knew what audiences wanted to watch at the time. So they kind of dictated the images that are kind of portrayed and how they were portrayed in a stereotypical world. When you started thinking about how many Latinos really were in America, and I remember this was, and Wilson, you'll probably help me remember this. This was the census of, I want to say it was maybe 20 plus years ago. There was a census about 20 years ago, and that census was a very sobering census to everyone. That's when they realized that the Latino community could possibly be a majority in another 20 years from there, and a majority of the minority communities. And and therefore there was like a different conversation. The paradigm started shifting, but unfortunately I think a lot of us in the community weren't really necessarily ready to kind of or felt disarmed enough to actually be able to say, hey, we're welcome to have a creative conversation about what we should look like on screen. That just was not on the table for any of us. And Wilson and as well as me and a few other amazing actors, friends of ours, colleagues of ours, were some of the few that were fortunate enough to be on that screen before it all kind of evolved. So as the trajectory of the screen started realizing that certain communities wanted to see themselves in different positions, you started seeing the evolution. But I think it wasn't until the census showed how big of the market it was for entertainment and how much power we had in every box office, that the paradigm started shifting. And when I look at how it's become and what is how it has evolved, I think that we feel that there is a wave coming, and then there's definitely a brighter day for the community. I think we have light years to go, absolutely, but I do feel that there is a sentiment right now where we're all kind of waking up to understand that leveraging one another's experiences and stories actually are probably going to be our strength in content. But I do feel that there is an evolution happening, and I feel proud. I feel very proud to have been there before and to hopefully also be here while seeing it completely change.
Yes, we're going to delve into that. Just wondering about your own personal journey from when you started acting. Have you seen more and more opportunities for Latino creative types, actors, directors? Have you witnessed that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that I have a production company. I have a first look deal with CBS Studios. I've had multiple deals with Fremantle Media, Relativity, Lionsgate. I've been in the studio system for a very long time. I think that there's always been an idea that is something that everyone's really excited to explore, but unfortunately, it hasn't been enough curating of those opportunities to put us in on a role of leadership. I will say that. That not until very recent years, I would say maybe until the last 10 to 5 years, where I've seen that there is some type of consciousness and a thoughtfulness in how we move about, hey, you know what, if we're going to hire these many directors, we should probably hire a few more women, a few more African Americans. Let's see if we can find a Latino, and then let's also see if we can find an Asian director, and that is kind of how the conversation is kind of evolving, but I do believe that there is a sentiment on how to make it better now. When it comes to screen representation, I think that the few Latinos that have been there in the past, I think it's been kind of an exciting thing to see that they've continued to open the doors for a new wave of young talent that is actually redefining where we are as a mass community. And when it comes to the behind the scenes, I really do think that, we're cultivating and we're sharpening our tools as showrunners, as directors and all that. And I think that there is a bigger agenda now to really find those directors that really can truthfully and authentically tell our stories on screen.
Thank you. Wilson, what's been your journey? What have you seen from the time that you first entered the industry till now?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I think what has changed visibly for me is who is allowed to tell their story. When we look at the history of images of Latino people on television and in media in general, it really has been those with anglicized features that have succeeded through the years predominantly. And so as people have been educated and informed about the diversity within the Latino community, the fact that we have as varied a culture and a population as the general population, right? That we come in all different colors and experiences and socioeconomic backgrounds and politics. So for me, what's been interesting in the last few decades is to see how we've seen more and more diversity depicted within the Latino community. Are we at a place where I believe we should be? Absolutely not. And I think the conversation around In the Heights recently is a good example of that, where so many of us who felt so overwhelmed and seen by that movie were so overwhelmed by being seen that we forgot to notice that we weren't all in the movie. And we were blinded by our own excitement, right? And come to find out, if you were a Dominican dark-skinned person watching that movie, you felt invisible in a movie that was about your community. So, we have a lot of work to do in terms of making sure that we all get seen, that the Latino community as a whole is understood for its complexity. And I'm excited to see the progress that we will see in the future. I also am heartened by the fact that we get to see more people within the LGBTQ community depicted within the Latino community. It's a conversation that I have been a part of for almost 30 years now. And to see the level of acceptance within the Latino community has been really moving to me personally, to see how we have grown as a culture in terms of those issues.
Thank you, Wilson. Alana, what has been your journey?
I feel super lucky with my trajectory and my journey. It's sort of touching on what Wilson was saying about how Latinidad is not a monolith and there's so many diverse perspectives within the community. And I am a white Latina. I'm half Cuban, half or Jewish American on my mom's side. And as grateful as I am to have had the opportunities I have, I recognize my privilege. I am grateful for it, and I'm going to use the opportunities I have gotten to open the door for others. But we're not going to have achieved full equity until the representation itself is intersectional. And that means Afro-Latina voices, Indigenous Latina voices from all different socioeconomic backgrounds. We have to show the world that there isn't just one way to be Latina. So I feel really, really grateful for what I've been given, but like, it's just like scratching the surface. Like there's, and touching on what you were talking about, Wilmer, it's like, you know, people are finally getting hip to like, oh, let's hire like directors, a Latino director here. Da, da, da. And the reason I think the shift is happening is, I think slowly but surely, we're getting more Latina people in the positions of gatekeepers. And that's what we need. That's how we move the needle, because then it's not we're filling a quota. It's not this will look good. It's me show running my show, and it's a no-brainer to have Latina directors because that's the story it is, and it's not anything that it's just natural. And so, and it's not just showrunners, it's studio executives, network executives. Like you need to have people at the top who are championing this and giving the shows to the people who hire those people. And like, again, so it's not just people who look like me, it's all facets of the Latina experience.
Definitely.
Can I piggyback on that just real quick? Because part of the conversation that I was trying to have after the In the Heights controversy started was that right along the same weekend that the In the Heights premiered, the LA Times issued a report about representation of Latino people in the media. And it was very clear that whereas we're 20% of the population here in the US, we're only about 5% of what we see on television and 5% in film. And so I was calling for more representation in general made by more of us, right? Because the more that we're allowed to tell our own stories, the more authentic they will actually be and actually look like our communities.
Right.
Perfect segue into my next question, which is about the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report 2021. Yes, it did say that less than 6% of the actors, and I think it was about 200 movies that were analyzed by the researchers, only about 6% were Latinx folks. This was movies now. Just, I know that most of you are in television, but you've done movies as well.
But the number in television was very similar. It was
right,
better.
exactly. Absolutely.
And you're directing that question to me?
Yes, Wilmer. What do you think 6% sounds correct based on what you're seeing? And if it's so low, why?
You know, here's the thing. They're not making a lot of movies a year, and that's a problem, right? So we're not producing as many movies as we did at some point in pop culture. Specifically because the rise of television and streaming platforms, you know, I think that they've made it even more obtainable to create shows that have a longer runway for an invitation of an engaged audience and a subscription, you know, kind of a model. So I would say that when it comes to film, and specifically to film, and then gearing back to what Wilson had pointed out, which is, you know, not very different in television too. When it comes to film, it's about how many stories or how many types of movies are being greenlit, you know, based on a traditional model that they're saying, okay, well, this is what audiences go to watch in the movies, right? So they're like, they go to tentpole movies. You got everything that's 150 million and above. You kind of want to go to the movie theater because it's the big sets and it's the big action and the, you know, whether it's Marvel or Star Wars, these movies, you know, you want to go there. In a lot of this IP and a lot of these existing franchises that are being rebooted and all that, and every year, which happens to be the movies that are being made the most, and I'm talking about cinema, you know, it's IP that has been written and been developed before we have created this signal. So, you know, so I think that what happens is that they're now telling their truthful, authentic stories, and we just happen to not be in those, you know, and call it by design, call it by like, darn it, we'll wait for the next one, you know, but now we're having a conversation of putting, you know, the same superhero suit on a different community, as opposed to creating original content that is actually rooted like what Wakanda did to that community, you know, like, and it uplifted the community in an incredible way. So when I think about like what our contribution is on cinema right now, you know, we don't have a lot of the leading characters. You know, we're not in even supporting cast at times. So I think it becomes a conversation of like, what stories are they producing, and what stories are the studios thinking are, you know, are marketable and profitable for them in their own personal theory, you know, and how they think that they should cast it in order to reassure butts in the seats. You know, I'm telling you a very inside baseball conversation. Okay, I mean, this is not the interview you thought you would have when you go, yes, you know, but it's growing into an 8%, and we all high five over it. We're just gonna keep it very real and very sober over here when we say that they're not making enough movies in universes where we are so incredibly authentic, rooted in it, that you don't even notice that there's a Latino in it. You just see yourself in it, you know. So I think about, you know, also going one step forward, that if you are going to set a movie in a universe in which we are authentically there, that we have to go the extra mile and research who are the characters, are the heroes in that neighborhood. It's a recipe, you know. But and then how do we bring it back to television? You know, in television, there have been more tries. There have actually been more misses than actual shots on TV. So every season, you know, another inside baseball situation, they put a lot of money in developing Latino shows, you know, and shows with a Latino lead and all that. And they go down the development grid, and, you know, and everyone's excited. We have 3 amazing Latino families, or this lead character is a Latino, they cast a Latino in it. In pilot season, you see Deadline, you see Variety, you see Hollywood Reporter, another Latino was cast as a lead, another Latino was cast as a lead. But when it comes to pilot season, I would say not even 1% of them actually are given the shot to get on the air. So they could develop all you want, but so that's the reason why when you look at like what is the percentages that actually makes it on the air, a lot more is being developed. And I will tell you that this is the uplifting moment of my statement, is that the studios and the networks are actually really trying to really develop more around the universe and the world and the authenticity, and trying to really position us in a place of leadership. But for somehow magically, those shows are just not making it on the air. And, you know, so I think that there is, you know, if you were to look at like the percentage of things that are developed, you know, for specific communities, you know, during a pilot season, then you would notice that there, you know, that it's like beyond the 6% that actually is on the screen, but it's just not making it. And somehow they're not getting the shot. And you look, some of our shows get about 5 to 6 tries. Some of those other shows get about 30 to 40 pilots of the same variation. And then when one gets on and makes it a hit, then other networks recreate the same hit, you know, with the same configuration, because it seems like that's what the audience wants to watch, more of the same show, which is like, the audiences are way smarter than that, you know? So I think a lot about where it's getting there. I think in a very near future, we're gonna see more of these shows actually get it on the air, and that percentage is definitely gonna evolve into a very lucrative one.
Wilson, why do you think that some of these shows aren't making it?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because I was sitting here listening to Wilmer, and I was thinking to myself that, you know, one of the problems that I see in some of in a lot of these pilots and a lot of these shows that don't get on the air is that they're trying to be too much to too many people. And like we were just saying a few minutes ago, the Latino community, the Latine community is not a monolith. You know, we come from very different countries, but we all come here and people think that we are all the same, but we're not. You know, the Ecuadorian experience is not the Puerto Rican experience, you know, is not the Argentinian experience. So when we create these shows that are supposedly marketed towards the Latino community, you lose the specificity that makes it feel like home, because you're trying to catch too many Latinos in the net. Whereas those of us who are artists know that the best art comes out of a specificity of experience that becomes universal. So stop trying to make a show that you think is going to appeal to Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Mexicans, Ecuadorians, Colombians, and make a show about a family that happens to be Colombian or whatever, and make it a great show, and we'll watch it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Wilson. I've thought the same thing. A lot of times I've watched shows that are supposedly Latino, but then it's just too broad. It's not very specific to that ethnic group. Would you like to add to that?
I just wanted to highlight one show really fast because and I know, and I'm not trying to kiss Wilmer's butt here, but I thought that Gentified got it right. You know, that is a very specific community, about a specific family, about running a specific business. And because they were so specific, they were able to bring in different elements of that family. And it made it feel like home. I'm not from East LA, and I'm not Mexican, but I loved that show and I saw myself in it.
Absolutely. Alana, would you like to add a little to this
conversation? Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, not to be a broken record, but it kind of goes back to the gatekeepers, because a lot of, I feel like in the examples we're saying of like, it feels too broad, or they're trying to pander, it's very rarely spearheaded by somebody who's actually connected to that experience. You know, it's somebody who's like, let me put a Latina girl at the front because that'll get, you know, butts in seats, or studios and networks being like, okay, like we need this, right? Like, it's just not authentic. So I think we need gatekeepers who get it. They need to give money to shows. They need to give money to marketing. Our audience is there. We are hungry. Whenever you see a top 10 show on Netflix, it's like Selena, Baker and the Beauty. It's Lucifer, which has this huge South American following. Like we are there. The desire is there. But I also think that, like, just because I've you know, talked a lot about this, it's like, I'm talking to like my family and my like Latina friends, and there's no difference between what like a Latina audience wants and what like the dominant culture audience wants. We all want to be entertained. We all want good stuff. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people's favorite shows are Broadchurch, you know, A Crazy Mystery, Real Housewives. Like, everyone's taste is so different. We just want to be entertained. And I just cannot wait for ubiquity. And when we can have so many shows on the air, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, this show is speaking for the entire Latina experience, because it doesn't have to, because it's about astronauts and there's a Latina lead. You know, like, that's what I want. That's the kind of stuff I want to make.
And I guess the follow-up to that is that when you're casting any show, there's no reason in the world why you can't cast a Latino as your lead, you know, an Afro-Latino especially, or a dark-skinned Afro-Latino. Like, give Gina Torres a show that we can watch for the next 10 years.
Give her 50 shows.
Right. So, you know, you don't have to make a Latino show. You can make a show and feature Latino talent in it. Hire Latino directors. Hire Latino writers.
Absolutely. We were talking about the gatekeepers. So the question to all of you, we're going to begin with Wilmer. Do you believe the gatekeepers, the power brokers, are really trying hard enough to level the playing field, to give more Latinos, either in front of the camera or behind the camera, the opportunities that really in this day and age are merited? What's your take on that, Wilmer?
You know, I have to say that in the trajectory of my life and in my career, and I've been doing this for about 25 years, and Wilson even probably longer than me too, because he started when he was like a fetus. You know, that's why he's so young still.
He's just trying to tell you that I'm older than him. That's
that's not true. That's not true. But the reason why I was bringing up, you know, the last 2 decades is because I've never seen a more eager, like you said, powers that be, you know, the heads of companies, to really trying to figure out, like, how do we really truly have a comprehensive conversation? I mean, I go from George Cheeks to Tiffany, who heads of diversity at Viacom CBS. You know, I've had some incredible conversations with George Cheeks and the company, you know, and Tiffany, about how do we not only feel authentic, but how do we expedite this solution? How do we get it to the forefront? I mean, I've had conversations with Jennifer Saki, I have conversations with Dana Walden, I have conversations with Gary Marsh. I mean, and Ted Sarandos, and these are amazing. You know, first of all, they're friends and they're amazing people, but they're genuinely trying to really figure this out. And I think that this is the moment where everyone has thoughtfully figured out that this is a critical and urgent conversation that has to be had, not just internally, but it has to be transparent. And a lot of these amazing leaders of some of these incredible, iconic, and very very vital platforms that have a crazy responsibility because they aggregate the most amount of audiences on a global scale, have a responsibility to really start portraying these stories and these characters the way that they were meant to, and how they really are. So I think that there is a major conversation happening, and I'm proud of some of these conversations that I've been having around town, because I can really tell that this is like, they're like, tell us where, just we need to figure out how to do this. And they're not for the first time, no one's assuming, and I'm not talking specifically about my friends, I'm talking about as in generalized now, as I kind of talk about most executives and VPs of companies and all that stuff, excluding my personal conversations with the friends that I mentioned, who are just incredible pioneers of trying to really figure out how do we continue to unite these stories. And I mentioned them specifically because there was the ones where there was no Latinos in television. They were the ones who put me on. And I had a crazy accent, and I had no business being on primetime at that time,
Yes,
and,
you did.
but my point is, it's like stereotypically, you wouldn't even think we had a box room there, but I will say that they really are trying to figure out, and the conversation is now, how can we discover? It's a conversation of discovery. And that's what's beautiful about this sentiment and about this point that we're making here, is that there is a thirst for discovery, for a director, for a writer, for a showrunner, for a DP, and then when it comes to stories, what is that IP that embodies our experience? What is that story? What is that life? What is that life story that we can bring to life that can bring pride to our heritage? And I think that conversation is being had. And I think that we as allies to that conversation have to be bold, and we have to say how it is. And we cannot be intimidated about our truthful and authentic ideas on how to fix this. The three of us, storytellers here on screen, have done this long enough to tell you this is what's going wrong, and I think they should really start taking our word for it, and I think this is where the creative conversation and creative partnership begins, because it's a true collaboration. We can't have them without us, and we can't have us without them. But the truth is that they understand how important we are now. And I think that we have to have the most thoughtful conversation and insightful conversation to be even more surgical about how to fix it.
I do think, and as much as I love hearing you and that point of view, I do think that they have no choice, right? Because of the changing demographics, because of this younger generation who is accepting less and less an inauthentic depiction of communities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this younger generation coming up is longing and asking and demanding that these stories be told from an authentic point of view. So they're looking to see who's writing this show. If this is a show about a Black family, are Black people involved? Is a Black showrunner? If this is a Latino show, is this a Latino show that, is being informed by an actual Latino lived experience? So I think while I'm really excited hearing that that's been your experience, I also think they know they have no choice but to get it together, because if they don't, they're going to lose it.
I mean, absolutely. But I also, and it's not at all, this is at all a debate. This is a compliment to what you're saying. But I will say that also, the Latino community, has to also really ignite and fire up and be passionate enough to sharpen their tools so they're ready for this opportunity. And we weren't. It's like being, it's like Latinos and the tech world, right? I don't know how. I think we're less than I forget the percentage, but we're not even like double digits, and maybe it's one double digit in the tech world. But this was never introduced to us as an option,
Right. But
right?
I think
so we gotta really sharpen each other's tools, and we gotta fire up each other to say, hey, this also can be you. This also can be for you. And
yes,
we gotta cultivate that.
The way that happens is that people are mentored, people are taught and given an opportunity to grow. And that is happening more and more. But let's be honest, that hasn't happened in the past. where we've seen, someone take someone under their wing, and this is how you get a show made. This is how you become a showrunner or a producer, or you're an actor and you want to go into directing. Here's how you do it. Some of us, so many of us who are starting out, don't even know the questions to ask. And so a lot of that comes from somebody who's willing to guide you. And there's been less opportunity in the past than there is now. And I hope that people are taking advantage of that and putting themselves out there. I think part of it too is for some of us to say, hey, I want to know how to do that. I'm putting myself out there and saying, I need help. I need a mentor. Go out and find out how to do these, be a part of this industry and get your stories told.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit now about the storytellers, the writers and the producers. Now, this same UCLA study found that maybe only about 3% of the writers and producers of these movies were Latinx. Ilana, what do you have to say about that? What do you think?
I laughed. It's just like, that's crazy. That's crazy. It's just, I think that it's a lot of things. I think, in one of the LA Times articles, the creator of Gordita Chronicles, who's a friend of mine, Claudia, talked about how, like, a lot of times we see more Anglo looking or white Latinx people rising to the top because of access, because of privilege, because it's something that like was presented as an option maybe when in their college or by people, who said this is something you could do. And that's not always the case for everybody. And I mean, the only thing that separates, what is this quote? It's my quote. I'm trying to remember what I've said. The only thing that separates, basically you need access. The only thing that separates talent, opportunity, access. People have talent. So many people have talent. The assistants on my show are some of the best writers I have ever worked with. I know that because they're in the room with me. They're in the room with me because life worked out where they knew about this thing. It should not be this crazy, like right. We need to make this industry so much more accessible. And I try to do it. I try to outreach and reach out and not just be like, I'm going to hire my friends from college. Like, I feel really proud of the room and the assistants and the crew that I've cultivated. But it's like when I was starting out, which wasn't super long ago, I'm like the first to admit that I'm very new to all of this. I did not know the questions to ask. I didn't even know, I don't even think I fully comprehended what a showrunner was, because if I had, I would have been saying I wanted to be one my whole life, and like, that's just something that, and I had plenty of access growing up, but it's also just this Hollywood, no matter what privilege you have, sometimes it's this weird secret club and we have to champion. And I used to always preach like inclusivity, obviously listen to everyone's voices. I was an assistant, and that's, my mentors and bosses on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Rachel Bloom and Aline Brosh McKenna, they saw me as a writer and a person, not just an assistant. So they treated me like that from day one. And I've always known that this is something that I believe in, but now that I'm a showrunner myself, and now that I am like in the position to promote, promote assistants into staff writers, give assistants scripts, like give people episodes. It's not just like a cool, kind thing that's like hip to do. It makes everything better. It is good business sense. Our show is better because we listen to people. Our show is better because we promoted 2 assistants to staff writers for production and they were on set producing their episodes. Our show is better because we let the writer's PA pitch in the room and some of her jokes were the best there. Like, when you listen to people, no matter what their background, and you uplift them, it is better business sense. It makes for a better product. We just have to find a way to get people the access.
Right. Speaking of uplifting people, I want to talk to you, Wilson, about your activism with the gay community. And when we talk about diversity, a lot of times we're talking about ethnicity or color or whatever, but there is certainly, from what I have seen, a trend toward including more gay characters in different TV shows, movies, etc. Have you seen this, and do you think it's here to stay?
Yes, and when I'm talking about depictions, I talk about the entire spectrum of the LGBTQ community, not just the gay part, because for the most part, most of the characters that we still see on television and even in film to this day is predominantly gay white men. So that is still true, but it's less and less true every year. You know, back in 1995, 94, 95, when I was on My So-Called Life, I was not just the only gay character, LGBTQ character on television at the time, but I was also only one of 2 Latinos on television at the time. So when we look at that and we look at today, it's a completely different world. Because, as I was saying earlier, I think the industry has to reflect, you know, the media has to reflect the society that we live in. And I think those gatekeepers are obviously taking note of the fact that the LGBTQ community has become vociferous in their demand to be seen, and so have communities of color. So I'm heartened by the fact that we're seeing changes. Do I wish it was happening faster? Of course. But I do love that we're starting to see more trans characters, especially trans characters of color. On Star Trek Discovery alone, we brought on a non-binary character and a trans character played by a non-binary and trans actors, both people of color. And so, you know, we're having that conversation on the show. I just want to see it on a broader scale. But I think that things are changing. They're changing much too slowly for me. And I want to see more diversity within the LGBTQ community on our screens.
Absolutely. Speaking of how Latinos are portrayed in terms of their character representation, there was another study, and this one was from USC, that showed that at least a quarter of Latinos on television were depicted as being lawbreakers and often had problems. A lot of them had problems in these shows. And so I know that I spoke with Congress member Castro, who's with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, about his concerns. I know he has been meeting with studio executives. And so I'm wondering about your take. Do you feel that the question is, how important is it to have great storylines, positive storylines that show the variety of different experiences of Latinos? I'll throw it out to all of you. Wilmer?
I'll just say this real quick. As problematic as In the Heights was in some areas, one of the areas that it succeeded beyond my wildest dreams is the fact that there was no violence, there was no crime. This was not about, you know, the mystery of solving a crime that was committed by a Latino. This was a story about different familial experiences and a culture. So it did that very well. You know, I think it's incredibly problematic that on television and in film, we are still seeing, you know, Latinos, African Americans, darker skinned people more depicted as criminals than their white counterparts. I think that issue is, the fact that that's still occurring in this day and age is insane to me. So, but I think there are biases that we all carry around with us and need to be called out. So I hope that we start to see a different depiction of our people as we go forward, and more like the ones we saw in the Heights.
Yes, and I want to talk about that. Absolutely. Wilmer, what's your take on this? I know you're working on a congressional level to a certain extent about these issues, the many issues of individuals of Latino descent being depicted in a negative way.
Yes, you know, so a lot of the conversation, it has to be approached as an ecosystem, and a lot of the things that we've created as whether it's a proposition or bill or conversation, a lot of the stuff that I've kind of gotten involved is about figuring out, you know, what are the many pieces of the puzzle so we can create actually pretty fast recovery to what entertainment and pop culture has done to our culture, you know, stereotypically, and the image of who we are and how we're portrayed and the perception of who we are as individuals, you know. So what I really do and appreciate what Wilson is saying, I think that, you know, and I wonder what, you know, Ms. Peña would have, you know, to say about this, because because a lot of the long-standing TV shows, right? I think, and and I hate to, I'm gonna throw, some people under the bus on this, but some of the traditional television, which is a lot of the multi-network procedurals, who are the catch the bad guy of the week, when your leading cast is, primarily, of a certain culture, they, in order to create a contrast, in a very weird philosophical storytelling, rule book, you have to create some type of contrast between the good guy and the bad guy, and ultimately they kind of go to a minority, to depict as actually the criminal, because it's the most mysterious culture, is the one that the less about, and so it's an easy target. And
You know what else it is too? It's easier. I think they believe, the creators of those shows think it's a shortcut for the audience to believe that
right.
person did something wrong when it's a person of color. But if you make it a white character, then you have to
explain,
you to go,
where did he go wrong?
Explaining. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, I think it also, oh, sorry.
No, please go.
I think it also, I mean, like, I keep coming back to ubiquity. Like, I would love, villains are fun to write. Villains are fun to play. How cool would it be if Cruella was a Latina? You know what I mean? Like, I don't want us to be so limited, but if there were shows where we were heroes, if there were shows where we were singing musical numbers, like in the Heights, if there were shows where we were bratty teenagers and, star-crossed lovers and like Shakespearean, if we have all of that, then the villains, it's not as glaring and it's not as problematic, because the dominant culture has all of that. The dominant culture gets to be Romeo and Juliet, and the dominant culture gets to be whoever the villain is in like the Matrix, and that is like, I wish that for us, because then it's fun to write villains. It's fun to play villains. It's also fun to sing a song and dance. And I think it's like, it's just it's a bummer to me that we have to limit ourselves at all, because we have so many stories to tell, and there are so many people who can tell them, and in so many different ways. And I just like, I hate that that's what we see. I hate that you turn on the TV and you just see, a dark-skinned Latino man as like the person who committed the crime, not as like the tap dancing Gene Kelly-esque love interest. Like, that's the kind of stuff I want to write.
Or the lawyer.
Yeah.
Or the lawyer. Or the one solving the crime.
We have Freddie Rodriguez in Bull playing an amazing lawyer right now. So,
oh, that's great. I mean, my parents met in law school. Like, my dad was like Cuban lawyer.
I wanted to bring up Freddie Rodriguez, and I wanted to also point out Jay Hernandez, and I wanted to point out Wilson Cruz, and I want to point out Adam Rodriguez. These are the all stars. These are the Ocean's 11s of primetime.
I want to see that movie. I want to make that movie. Let's make that.
Exactly. But these are the guys.
Ocean's 11.
Ocean's 11. Oceano 11.
Oceano 11.
Yeah. So
little Spanglish there.
Yeah, but I commend a lot of these actors that I've mentioned so much, because throughout our last 2 decades, all of you have painted a different picture on primetime. You were able to say no. The power of being able to say no to playing that no to this is privilege to very few. But thankfully, some of these great guys, some of these good guys, some of these heroes had the ability to say, I'm going to play him like this. But also they had the courage to talk to your showrunners, talk to your writers, and be like, where am I coming from? Who is my family? What is my country of origin? Like, what do I eat? How do I sleep? And what accent am I going to have? And like, these were very important collaborations that we as actors have to have with our writers, because, this is where authenticity happens. Because we also think about reskinning characters, right? I hate when the pilot season comes and they go, well, we audition African-American and Asian and a Latino. It could be anyone. Like, that's not how it works. You either develop a Latino character or an Asian character or an African-American character and give those characters an actual history. So therefore, you don't even have to mention that history. That character, when he plays it, you undeniably is authentic. So coming full circle to your question about us playing mostly the bad guys, on primetime in some of those shows, I think it goes full circle to like, what is the ecosystem of this conversation? Where are we going wrong in this? And I think that there is a narrative that's happening in the news. There was a signal that was created about multiple of our minority communities that were amplified by hateful communities, and therefore somehow entertainment had to reflect onto what was happening pop culturally, and they embraced these stereotypes to bring them to screen because it was kind of the topic, and that's how you clickbait people into watching your shows.
Yeah, I think it's also like it's got to be good. It kind of goes back to like, we want good stuff. Like,
right.
Villains are fun to write as long as the villain is not damaging and it's not a terrible stereotype. Like and that's why we just need more. Like, it's amazing to have conversations with showrunners and these gatekeepers, but imagine how much more shorthand it would be if you didn't have to explain it all to them. Like, I think that's just. It's getting people in those positions of power so we can write a nuanced villain, not like a stereotypical drug dealer.
The problem is that we have to explain this, unfortunately, for the first time.
Yeah.
We've never had an opportunity to explain it to
no
them.
one wanted to listen.
No one wanted to listen, but there is a new dawn, there is a new sunrise to this. And I mean, look at you. I mean, I'm so proud to see you on the screen and talk on behalf of not just Latinas, but women, and I think it's all these, it's examples like you that go, just let me close my eyes, let her run it, because that you got to trust individuals like you that just run with the ball. Here's the ball. You're going to score. I don't need to even tell you, where to pass it or how to move to the play, and I think that I think it goes on us a little bit, right? We can only hold the powers that be and the gatekeepers responsible to, for so long. We got to be a little bit more bold, and thank God you're being so bold to say, I'm gonna uplift this, writer assistant. I'm gonna develop something with this other writer assistant, and in our company we've done things where I bring interns, and the interns eventually throughout the years get upgraded to executives and development executives and program executives. So my company is filled of those stories. They all started as interns, and now Jessica Acevedo is now the senior vice president of alternative content at our company, and and vice versa with Leo, who came in as an intern, became my assistant, and now he's head of audio narratives for my company. So we do podcast. But we have to sharpen our tools, and if you have the pedigree, you have the experience, we really have to kind of get in there and help our community be ready for that conversation and give them the questions, because nobody gave it to us, so we might as well give the cliff notes.
One last question, because I know Wilson has to leave, and I want to ask you about, you were talking about who is accountable, and we talked about the studios, and I heard you, Wilmer, talk about how we need to have responsibility. When we talked about colorism, when we talked about negative stereotypes, what about Spanish language television and some of the images that we see? How responsible and accountable should Spanish language television be, and all of Spanish language programming, for some of what we see? What is your
That's
point?
A hard question. That's a very hard question. I'm sorry to jump in before you guys. I probably have a lot more experience with Spanish content than you guys.
Please.
Because I grew up with telenovelas, okay? I mean, in my house, Univision and Telemundo is like the national flower, So here's the thing is, if you could ever, are you familiar with Spider-Verse, a multiverse experience, So there is such a thing as like the Spanish-speaking content is in a whole different dimension. It's its own ecosystem, it's its own enterprise, it's its own it's a monument of a corporation. They have found a language, a likeness, a tone, and a meal that our Latino community that speaks Spanish, that loves telenovelas, but to Ms. Peña's idea, they have created a world where all of them Latinos are allowed to be the good guy and the bad guy. So they don't share a lot of responsibility of what we're doing in the English speaking language. We have a responsibility to paint our image on a global scale, right? Because we don't have ecosystems that are mainstream that travel around the world. The Latino community does, because all of the content that they produce go all the way from Mexico to Central America and South America and even Spain. So because our world is a Latino world, we are allowed to create a story that involves us in every aspect of those characters. But to your point, Jana, that I think is really, you're really poignant. If you have a Latino lead and you have a Latino antagonist, I don't know if I'm gonna have a problem with that. You know what I mean?
I guess the question she's getting at is, in Spanish language television, can we agree that they can do a better job of showing a more diverse picture of?
Oh, I thought you were saying, do they have a responsibility, or how much influence they had? I think that's what you meant.
Well, if I'm a mainstream producer and I want to find out more about what the Latinos look like and do, and I tune into Spanish language television, I may come away with the idea that this is all that they want to deal with, and this is what they want to be. I think, this conversation that can continue at some point in time. Wilson?
No, absolutely. And I think it's a valuable and necessary and timely conversation to have about colorism within the Latino community, and how it's almost invisibility for Afro-Latino people on Spanish language television in those telenovelas. So, I mean, there is a conversation to be had. And I think it's about racism. It's about Black lives mattering, even in the Latino community.
Yeah, and it's a conversation that white Latinos and light skin, like, we need to be having it. You know what I mean? Like,
those of us with that privilege need to be having it, and we need to be bringing it up.
What a wonderful conversation we've had today. I want to thank you all so much, Alana Peña, Wilmer Valderrama, and Wilson Cruz. And thank you for joining us. I'm Saida Pagan.